Welcome to Rare Coin Lab. Today, we're taking a closer look at an ordinary-looking Washington quarter that could reveal some surprisingly important details once you know exactly what to look for. First coin, 1776, 1976 Washington Bicentennial Quarter is one of those American coins that looks ordinary at first glance. Yet a closer examination can reveal a fascinating story of history, mass production, and serious collector interest. Created to celebrate the 200th anniversary of American independence, this quarter replaced the traditional eagle reverse with a colonial drummer, a torch, and 13 stars representing the original colonies, while the obverse carries the familiar portrait of George Washington and the distinctive dual date 1776, 1976. Millions were produced, so most examples are not rare treasures, but that is exactly what makes the exceptional pieces so interesting. Among the enormous population are coins with unusually high grades, recognized die varieties, special compositions, and genuine mint errors that can attract strong competition from collectors. Later, we will look at authenticated auction results and the specific characteristics that can push one example far above another in collector value, because the difference between an ordinary bicentennial quarter and a truly desirable one is rarely obvious at first sight. The story of this quarter begins in the early 1970s, when the United States was preparing for the approaching bicentennial celebration. The government wanted the nation's 200th anniversary to be represented not only through ceremonies and monuments, but also through something Americans encountered every day: their pocket change. Congress authorized special circulating designs for the quarter, half-dollar and dollar, allowing millions of ordinary citizens to participate in the celebration simply by using money. Instead of creating a separate commemorative coin that would remain mostly in collections, the Mint placed the new bicentennial designs directly into everyday commerce. The quarter was particularly important because it was one of the country's most frequently used denominations. The unusual 1776, 1976 dual date commemorated both the beginning of American independence and the bicentennial year, while the new reverse design gave the denomination an unmistakable Revolutionary-era identity. Production began during the period surrounding the celebration, and the coins continued entering circulation in enormous numbers. That decision created a fascinating contradiction for collectors. The coin became historically significant and extremely popular, yet its massive production meant that simply finding one was never enough to establish rarity. Technically, the regular circulation bicentennial quarter is a copper-nickel-clad coin with an approximate composition of 75% copper and 25% nickel in its outer layers surrounding a copper core. It measures approximately 24.3 millimeters in diameter, weighs about 5.67 grams, and has a reeded edge. Philadelphia produced hundreds of millions of regular strike examples, while Denver produced even more, making the standard clad issues extremely common compared with genuinely scarce coins. San Francisco also produced special collector versions, including clad proofs and 40% silver bicentennial quarters, which makes composition an important part of identification. A collector should never assume that every bicentennial quarter is silver simply because it looks different under certain lighting. The edge can provide an important clue, because a normal clad quarter typically reveals its layered construction, while a silver-clad version has different characteristics. Weight can also help, although it should never be used alone to authenticate a coin. A reliable digital scale, accurate measurements, mint mark identification, and close examination of the surfaces provide a much stronger starting point. When a coin appears potentially valuable, professional authentication and grading become especially important because altered, damaged, or counterfeit pieces can sometimes imitate the characteristics collectors are searching for. The visual design is one of the strongest reasons this quarter remains popular decades after the bicentennial celebration. The obverse continues the famous Washington portrait originally associated with the series, with liberty above the portrait in God W.E. Trust beside it, and the special 1776-1976 dual date below. The reverse, designed by Jack L.R., completely changes the personality of the denomination. Instead of the traditional eagle, the coin shows a colonial drummer accompanied by a torch and 13 stars. The drummer represents the people of the Revolutionary era, while the 13 stars recall the original colonies. From a collecting perspective, however, the design is only the foundation. Condition can make an enormous difference. A circulated quarter may show wear on Washington's hair, flattened details on the drummer, scratches, contact marks, dull surfaces, and discoloration. A high-grade mint state example can retain strong luster, sharp details, and clean surfaces with minimal contact marks. Professional grading services generally use numerical grades to describe condition, with higher mint state grades becoming increasingly difficult to achieve. A coin can look nearly perfect to the unaided eye and still lose a grade because of tiny marks, weak strike characteristics, or surface disturbances visible under magnification. Proof examples are evaluated separately, and exceptionally attractive proof surfaces can receive special designations for strong contrast between the mirrored fields and frosted devices. This difference in condition is where the value story becomes much more interesting. Most ordinary circulated bicentennial quarters are not rare and generally remain close to their face value, while many normal uncirculated pieces carry only modest premiums. The serious money appears when a coin combines exceptional preservation with scarcity or a recognized variety. For example, a professionally certified 1976 D-clad bicentennial quarter, graded MS-68, achieved an auction result of $6,463, showing what can happen when an extremely high grade meets collector demand. That result should not be interpreted as the normal value of a bicentennial quarter. It represents a particular certified coin with exceptional condition. A hypothetical certified high-grade example might bring around $1,650, while another attractive coin with a more desirable combination of grade and variety could move beyond $3,000. The exact amount depends on the specific coin, its certification, eye appeal, auction environment, and current collector demand. This is why online claims that every bicentennial quarter is worth thousands of dollars are misleading. An ordinary circulated coin and an elite certified specimen may look similar in a casual photograph. Yet their market positions can be completely different. Serious collectors rely on documented auction records and comparable certified examples rather than inflated asking prices found in online listings. Die varieties and mint errors provide another major area of interest. One documented variety is the 1976 D double die obverse, including recognized FS varieties that specialists identify by examining specific areas of the design. Genuine double dies are created during the die-making process and are fundamentally different from ordinary mechanical or machine doubling that can occur during striking. This distinction is critical because a collector can easily mistake a damaged or mechanically doubled letter for a rare variety. Professional variety attribution can determine whether an unusual-looking coin has genuine numismatic significance. Mint errors can be even more dramatic. A wrong planchet error occurs when a coin is struck on a blank intended for another denomination, creating unusual physical characteristics that can be confirmed through weight, diameter, metal composition, and expert examination. Other possible errors include clips, off-center strikes, broad strikes, and partial collars. Authenticated examples demonstrate that these errors can bring substantial premiums. One bicentennial quarter struck on a Jefferson nickel planchet and certified MS-62 sold for $900 at auction, while other unusual errors have produced different results depending on their severity and grade. The important lesson is that an unusual appearance does not automatically equal rarity. A genuine mint error must be distinguished from damage that occurred after the coin left the mint, and professional authentication is often essential before assigning a significant value. Preservation can also determine whether a potentially desirable coin remains collectible or loses some of its appeal. Collectors should avoid polishing, rubbing, abrasive cleaning, or harsh chemical treatments because a cleaned coin can become less desirable even if it looks brighter afterward. Fingerprints can also become problematic, especially on proof or high-grade coins, so valuable examples should be handled carefully by their edges. For long-term storage, collectors should use inert holders or professional encapsulation rather than low-quality materials that may contain harmful substances such as PVC. A potentially valuable quarter can be examined under good lighting with a magnifier, weighed accurately, and compared with documented specifications before being submitted to a professional grading service. Grading is not simply a judgment of whether a coin looks shiny or new. Specialists evaluate surface preservation, luster, strike quality, contact marks, wear, and overall eye appeal. Population reports can also provide useful information about how many examples have been certified at particular grades, although those numbers should be interpreted carefully because coins can sometimes be resubmitted for higher grades. For collectors, the important question is not merely how many bicentennial quarters were produced, but how many survive in the exact combination of grade, variety, composition, and era category being studied. Ultimately, the 1976 Washington Bicentennial Quarter is a perfect example of why coin collecting requires more than simply recognizing an old-looking coin. Its enormous production means that most examples are common, but its historical importance, distinctive design, special collector issues, high-grade survivors, recognized varieties, and genuine mint errors create several different paths to rarity. A normal circulated quarter may be worth little more than face value, while a superior certified example can bring hundreds, or, in exceptional circumstances, thousands of dollars. Documented auction records have shown that the very best pieces can go much higher, including the $6,463 result for an MS-68 1976 D-clad example, and an $8,400 result for a certified double-die variety. Those extraordinary prices belong to specific coins with verified characteristics and should never be applied to every quarter carrying the same bicentennial design. A collector who discovers one should therefore resist the temptation to clean it, alter it, or immediately believe an enormous online valuation. Instead, examine the mint mark, composition, edge, surfaces, strike quality, and possible varieties carefully. Then compare the coin with reliable references and authenticated auction records. The true value of a bicentennial quarter comes from the combination of authenticity, rarity, condition, variety, and demand, not from the date alone. And that is what makes this seemingly familiar piece of pocket change such an interesting chapter in American numismatic history. Next coin, at first glance, a circulated 1965 Washington quarter can look like nothing more than an ordinary piece of pocket change. But this particular year marks one of the most important turning points in modern American coinage. The quarter you're looking at belongs to the first regular-issue Washington quarter production made entirely from copper-nickel-clad metal rather than the traditional 90% silver composition used through 1964, and that change was driven by a national shortage of circulating silver and major economic pressures facing the United States. More than 1 billion 1965 quarters were produced, so an ordinary worn example is certainly not rare simply because of its age. Yet the same date contains recognized double-die varieties, unusual production pieces, exceptionally preserved survivors, and other characteristics that can transform an otherwise familiar coin into a serious numismatic collectible. The fascinating part is that the most valuable examples are not necessarily the ones that look oldest or most unusual to an inexperienced observer. They are the coins whose authenticity, variety, grade, surfaces, strike, and provenance can withstand professional examination. As we move through the story of this quarter, we'll uncover why the year 1965 was so important, how these coins were manufactured, what collectors actually look for, and which characteristics have caused authenticated examples to sell for dramatically more than ordinary circulated pieces. The circumstances surrounding the 1965 quarter were extraordinary. By the early 1960s, The rising price of silver and heavy demand for American coinage had created serious pressure on the nation's supply of silver coins. The traditional Washington quarter, introduced in 1932 and made from 90% silver until 1964, was increasingly being removed from circulation by people who believed the metal itself was worth preserving. The United States responded with the Coinage Act of 1965, which fundamentally changed the composition of the dime and quarter. Beginning with the new clad issues, the outer layers became an alloy of 75% copper and 25% nickel bonded to a pure copper core. The government also suspended mint marks on regular coinage during this period, partly to discourage the public from searching for coins from particular facilities and hoarding them. That is why a normal 1965 Washington quarter does not carry a visible P, D, or S mint mark beneath Washington's neck. The absence of a mint mark should therefore not automatically be interpreted as evidence of a rare Philadelphia era. Production began on August 23, 1965, and continued into 1966, while coins bearing the 1965 date were being manufactured to satisfy enormous demand. This was an era of transition, and the quarter became a physical record of a country moving away from traditional precious metals circulating money toward the modern clad coinage Americans still use today. The physical specifications of the 1965 quarter reveal how closely the new coin remained connected to the Washington quarter that preceded it. The regular issue measures approximately 24.3 millimeters in diameter, weighs 5.67 grams, and has a reeded edge. Its composition consists of 75% copper and 25% nickel outer layers surrounding a pure copper center, creating the familiar clad structure that became standard for U.S. quarters after 1964. The official regular strike mintage is listed at 1,819,717,540 pieces, an enormous production figure that explains why circulated examples remain readily encountered by collectors. The coins were produced for commerce rather than primarily for collectors, meaning they entered cash registers, vending machines, banks, pockets, parking meters, and countless transactions across the country. The Philadelphia Mint is the facility associated with the regular issue catalogued without a mint mark, but there is an important complication. San Francisco also produced 1965 dated quarters without mint marks for inclusion in special mint sets. PCGS records 2,360,000 such quarters from San Francisco. This distinction matters when examining an apparently ordinary no mint mark example, because not every 1965 quarter without a mint mark can be understood simply by looking at the date. The overwhelming majority encountered in circulation, however, are normal clad business strikes, and their enormous production means that age alone contributes very little to their value. What matters is what happened to the individual coin after it left the mint, and whether it possesses a characteristic that separates it from the enormous population of ordinary survivors. The artwork carries its own connection to American history. The obverse features John Flanagan's familiar profile of George Washington, with liberty positioned above, "In God We Trust" to the left, and the date 1965 beneath the portrait. Flanagan's Washington design had already become one of the most recognizable images in American coinage, and its continued use during the transition to clad money created a visual bridge between the Silver Era and the modern era. On the reverse, the familiar heraldic eagle remains surrounded by the inscriptions United States of America, EPLUBUSUNUM, and quarter dollar. But collectors studying the 1965 issue encounter something more subtle. The mint modified the reverse design when the clad era began. Specialists recognize a Type C reverse associated with 1965 circulation strikes, with sharper details in portions of the wreath and leaves compared with earlier reverse designs. These differences may be almost invisible to someone casually examining a quarter, but variety collectors study precisely these small design changes. The manufacturing process began with the preparation of the clad strip, from which planchets were produced, followed by annealing, cleaning, upsetting, and striking between engraved dies under enormous pressure. The quality of the final coin depended on the condition of the dies, the preparation of the blanks, the striking pressure, alignment, and countless mechanical variables. That is why two coins produced from the same year and facility can eventually appear very different after decades of circulation, while tiny production differences can also become valuable clues for specialists studying die varieties. For the circulated coin described here, condition is especially important because circulation leaves a permanent record on the surfaces. Friction gradually removes the original mint luster from the highest points of Washington's hair and portrait, while the reverse eagle, lettering, and wreath can develop flattened details and contact marks. Once a coin has circulated, professional graders use the appropriate circulated grades, ranging from about good through extremely fine and about uncirculated depending on the amount of wear and the preservation of remaining detail. Coins that never entered normal circulation are evaluated in mint state grades, generally from MS-60 upward, where surface marks, luster, strike quality, and eye appeal become increasingly important. A circulated 1965 quarter should not be artificially polished to make it appear brighter. Cleaning can permanently damage the surfaces and may prevent the coin from receiving a normal straight grade. Color classifications such as brown, red-brown, and red are principally associated with copper cents and are not the standard terminology used to grade a copper-nickel-clad Washington quarter. Instead, collectors examine original luster, tunning, discoloration, spots, abrasions, and the overall appearance of the clad surfaces. Strike quality also matters because a coin can be uncirculated while still displaying areas of weakness caused by the striking process. For a normal circulated example, however, a little wear does not make the coin rare. What can change the equation is the discovery of an authenticated variety or error that survives despite circulation. A collector might encounter a certified circulated double die example worth several $100s, while an especially desirable certified variety in a strong grade could move into the $1,000 to $2,000 range. Those figures would depend entirely on the specific attribution, grade, originality, and market conditions, rather than simply the fact that the coin says 1965. One of the most important discoveries associated with this date is the 1965 double die obverse FS101. This is not ordinary machine doubling or damage caused by circulation. The FS101 variety displays substantial, recognizable doubling across portions of In God W.E. Trust, Liberty, the date, and the left side of Washington's profile. PCGS describes it as a very rare and popular variety, and specifically warns that it should not be confused with the less dramatic FS102 variety, which shows more limited doubling primarily around Liberty. The distinction is crucial because collectors searching through old quarters can easily mistake scratches, flattening, or mechanical doubling for a genuine doubled die. A true doubled die originates during the creation of the die itself, meaning every coin struck from that die can carry the same distinctive doubled characteristics. PCGS records an FS101 auction result of $489 for an AU58 example sold by Heritage Auctions, while another documented FS101 example graded MS64 by PCGS later realized $1,518.75 through Great Collections. FS102 has also produced four-figure results in higher grades, with documented auction information showing an MS65 example at $1,650. These are exactly the kinds of results that explain why variety collectors examine seemingly ordinary 1965 quarters so carefully. Strong authenticated FS101 or FS102 might reasonably attract $1,250, $2,100, or even more depending on grade and competition, but there is no justification for assigning such values to a normal circulated quarter merely because its lettering looks slightly unusual. Identification requires comparison with recognized diagnostic features, and when serious money is involved, professional attribution. Errors create another fascinating category, but this is where authentication becomes even more important. A genuine mint error occurs because something went wrong during production, not because a coin was scratched, bent, chemically treated, or damaged after entering circulation. Collectors may encounter legitimate error categories such as off-center strikes, clips, broad strikes, partial collars, or coins struck on an incorrect planchet, but each type requires specific physical evidence. The 1965 quarter is also notable because the transition from silver to clad production created opportunities for unusual pieces that specialists have documented. One particularly important category is the 1965 quarter struck on a silver planchet, an extremely unusual transitional type error that has appeared in the numismatic marketplace and has commanded a substantial premium when authenticated. Such pieces must be examined carefully because silver coins from earlier years can easily be mixed into collections and mistaken for 1965 errors. Weight, diameter, edge appearance, metal composition, die characteristics, and professional certification all become important. Counterfeits can also be created by altering dates, manipulating mint marks, plating ordinary coins, or fabricating supposed errors. Fortunately, the 1965 issue provides several ways to test suspicious pieces. A precise scale can identify major weight differences, although weight alone cannot prove authenticity. Magnification can reveal altered surfaces, tool marks, unnatural doubling, or suspicious lettering. A professional grading service can provide authentication and attribution when the financial stakes justify the expense. If someone claims that a circulated 1965 quarter is a rare silver error worth thousands, the correct response is not excitement based on the claim alone. It is verification. The market rewards documented rarity, and extraordinary valuations require extraordinary evidence. That principle brings the 1965 Washington quarter back to the central question of collector value. The overwhelming majority of the 1.819 billion piece regular issue remain common, particularly in circulated grades, and many certified ordinary mint state examples are not remotely worth thousands. One PCGS-listed MS-66 example, for instance, sold for only $38 in a 2020 David Lawrence Rare Coins auction, illustrating just how different a normal high-grade coin can be from a rare variety. Yet the same PCGS record for the regular issue reports an extraordinary auction result of $12,650 for a gem BU example sold by Stax in January 2005. That result is an important historical auction record, but it should not be presented as the normal value of a 1965 quarter or even as the expected value of every uncirculated example. Auction records can reflect exceptional quality, exceptional eye appeal, certification circumstances, market competition, and the particular standards of a given era. The most sensible approach is to compare like with like. A circulated ordinary quarter may remain close to face value. A strong uncirculated example could command a premium. A recognized FS101 or FS102 double die can move into the hundreds or four-figure territory, and a truly exceptional certified example or rare authenticated error can enter a completely different level of the market. For a collector evaluating a possible discovery, preservation should come before valuation. Do not clean the coin, do not scrape suspicious areas, and do not attempt home experiments that could damage evidence. Place it in a quality inert holder, handle it by the edges, photograph both sides, record its weight and measurements, and seek an experienced numismatist or professional grading service if the diagnostics suggest something unusual. The lasting importance of the 1965 Washington quarter comes from more than its potential price. It represents the moment when America's everyday quarter crossed from the traditional silver era into the modern clad era, a transformation driven by economic reality, changing metal markets, and the practical need to keep billions of coins moving through the American economy. Its massive mintage makes ordinary circulated examples accessible, but that same enormous population gives collectors a huge field in which to search for the unusual. The documented FS101 and FS102 double dies demonstrate how a small manufacturing difference can create an entirely separate collecting category, while the exceptional auction records demonstrate why condition and rarity must always be evaluated together. A coin discovered in circulation should therefore be judged on evidence rather than expectation. The date alone does not make it rare. The absence of a mint mark is normal for the regular 1965 issue, and ordinary wear does not create a premium. But if the coin displays the correct diagnostics for a recognized double die, an authenticated mint error, an unusually high level of preservation, or another documented collectible characteristic, the story changes. An exceptional certified coin could bring $2,700, $3,400, or more in a competitive market, while the extraordinary $12,650 auction record shows that the very top end can be far beyond those levels. The important word is exceptional. Those prices belong to specific authenticated coins, not to every 1965 quarter carrying Washington's portrait. In the end, the real attraction of this coin is that it preserves a moment when the United States changed the metal in its pocket money while leaving the familiar face of Washington in place. More than 6 decades later, that ordinary-looking quarter can still teach collectors about economics, manufacturing, die varieties, authentication, grading, and the difference between a common survivor and a genuinely important piece of American numismatic history. Last coin, a circulated 1997 D Washington quarter, can disappear into a handful of ordinary change so easily that most people would never give it a second look. Yet, when we examine one closely, a more interesting question begins to emerge. What separates an ordinary late 1990's quarter from an example that serious collectors actually want? The answer is not simply the age of the coin, because this quarter is not an old silver issue, and its Denver production was substantial. Instead, the investigation begins with details that are easy to overlook. The tiny D mint mark beside Washington's portrait, the preservation of the original surfaces, the sharpness of the strike, the quality of the luster, and the possibility that a particular coin survived in extraordinary condition. Experienced collectors know that a common modern coin can become surprisingly difficult to find at the highest grades because circulation, storage, bag marks, counting machines, and decades of handling eliminate most of the finest examples from consideration. That is why this particular coin deserves to be examined rather than dismissed. As we work through it, we'll trace how it was made at the Denver Mint, identify the physical characteristics that establish what it really is, examine how collectors judge circulated and uncirculated examples, and eventually look at verified auction evidence showing exactly how much the finest authenticated examples have brought. More importantly, we'll see why those prices apply to exceptional certified coins rather than to every 1997 D quarter that happens to carry the same date and mint mark. To understand the 1997 D quarter, it helps to place it inside the larger story of American coinage at the end of the 20th century. By 1997, the Washington quarter had already been in production for more than 6 decades, and the original silver era was long gone. Since 1965, regular Washington quarters had been struck from copper-nickel-clad metal rather than the 90% silver alloy used through 1964. The 1997 issue, therefore, belongs to the mature modern-clad period, when quarters were being produced in enormous quantities to support an economy increasingly dependent on automated vending, transportation systems, retail transactions, parking meters, and cash registers. The United States economy was expanding during much of the late 1990s, and everyday commerce generated enormous demand for circulating coinage. The Denver Mint was one of the country's major production facilities, and its D mint mark identifies the facility responsible for this particular regular strike issue. Unlike some earlier periods when mint marks were intentionally omitted, the 1997 D quarter clearly carries the D beneath the portrait near the lower right side of Washington's neck. That small letter is one of the first things an investigator should check because it establishes the coin's production origin. PCGS lists the 1997 D regular strike quarter with a mintage of 599,680,000 pieces, an enormous number that immediately tells us something important. The date and D mint mark alone do not create rarity. Now turn the coin over and begin examining its physical identity. The 1997 D Washington quarter measures 24.3 millimeters across, weighs approximately 5.67 grams, and has a reeded edge. Its standard composition is 75% copper and 25% nickel over a pure copper center, producing the familiar clad construction used for regular Washington quarters of this era. That layered structure is especially useful when authenticating a suspicious example because the edge can reveal whether the coin has the expected copper-colored core between the outer nickel-bearing layers. The obverse carries John Flanagan's Washington portrait, with Liberty above, In God We Trust to the left, and the date below. The reverse presents the heraldic eagle with its wings extended, surrounded by United States of America, EPLUBUSUNUM, and quarter dollar. Although the design may look completely familiar, specialists understand that every detail matters when examining a coin for quality. Look closely at Washington's hair, cheek, jawline, lettering, date, and the sharpness of the reverse eagle's feathers. Then inspect the fields for contact marks and scratches. The manufacturing process began with clad metal strip being prepared into blanks, followed by annealing, cleaning, upsetting, and finally striking between dies under tremendous pressure. Every stage could influence the finished coin. A strong strike can preserve crisp design details, while worn dies or mechanical problems can produce weakness. After leaving the mint, however, the coin entered a completely different environment: bags, counting machines, transport, banks, stores, and pockets. That journey is often what determines whether a modern quarter remains ordinary or becomes a condition rarity. Because the coin in question is circulated, the next stage of our investigation is the evidence left behind by everyday use. Start with Washington's portrait. On a circulated example, the highest points of the hair and facial features gradually lose their original texture as friction removes metal. On the reverse, the eagle's breast and wing details can soften, while the open fields collect scratches and contact marks. The original mint luster that once moved across the surfaces under light becomes increasingly subdued as the coin is handled. Experienced collectors do not judge condition by brightness alone. A shiny coin can have been harshly cleaned, polished, or chemically treated, and such treatment can actually reduce its desirability. Professional grading distinguishes circulated grades according to the amount and location of wear, while coins that show no evidence of circulation can qualify for mint state grades, such as MS-60 and higher. At the top end, even tiny contact marks can separate one grade from another. PCGS's population information illustrates why the upper end of the 1997 D issue becomes increasingly interesting. Certified examples exist through the MS-68 level, but the population becomes much smaller as the grade rises. The current PCGS population report lists 409 certified 1997 D coins across its displayed mint state grades, including a small number at the highest levels. That figure is a certification population, not a census of every surviving coin, because many coins remain raw and individual pieces can be submitted more than once. This is also why color terminology must be used correctly. Red, red-brown, and brown classifications are primarily associated with copper cents and are not standard color designations for a copper-nickel-clad Washington quarter. For this coin, collectors instead concentrate on original luster, natural tunning, surface preservation, discoloration, and overall eye appeal. At this point, the question changes from "is this an old quarter?" to "does this particular quarter have something the market actually rewards?" For a normal circulated 1997 D quarter, the answer is usually no, and that is an important fact to state clearly. The coin's substantial mintage means that ordinary circulated pieces are common, and there is no responsible basis for claiming that every 1997 D quarter is worth thousands of dollars. Even certified mint state examples can sell for relatively modest amounts. PCGS records an MS-66 example selling for $13 in a David Lawrence auction and an MS-67 example selling for $52 in another documented sale. Those results are useful because they establish a realistic baseline. The market does not automatically assign a huge premium simply because a coin receives a high numerical grade. What happens when we reach the extreme upper end is much more revealing. PCGS records a verified auction record of $978 for a 1997 D Washington quarter graded MS-68, sold by Heritage Auctions on January 7, 2004. That is the documented record I would use rather than inventing a four-figure price simply to make the story sound more dramatic. A particularly attractive coin approaching the highest grades could therefore be discussed in the hundreds of dollars, while an extraordinary certified specimen could approach or exceed the high hundreds depending on market conditions. Because the verified record is $978, it would be misleading to casually assign $1,500, $2,500, or $4,000 values to an ordinary 1997 D quarter without evidence. If a future auction establishes a higher authenticated result, that would be a separate market event. For now, the evidence tells us that exceptional condition, not the date by itself, is the primary reason this issue attracts serious attention. There is another layer to the investigation: varieties and errors. When collectors examine a 1997 D quarter, they should not immediately assume that every unusual line, doubled letter, damaged rim, or strange-looking surface represents a valuable mint error. True errors occur during production, while many apparent abnormalities are created later through circulation damage, machine contact, environmental exposure, or intentional alteration. A genuine doubled die must show consistent design doubling created during die production, not the flat, shelf-like appearance often associated with mechanical doubling. Likewise, an off-center strike, clipped planchet, broad strike, partial collar, or wrong planchet piece must display physical evidence consistent with a mint production event. For a suspicious 1997 D quarter, begin with the date and D mint mark, then inspect the lettering and major design elements under magnification. Compare suspicious features with established numismatic references rather than relying on social media photographs. Check the weight and diameter against the official specifications, examine the edge for the expected clad construction, and look for evidence of tooling or altered surfaces. Counterfeit awareness is especially important when a supposedly ordinary modern quarter is offered with an extraordinary claim attached to it. An altered mint mark, fabricated doubling, plated surface, or artificially damaged coin can look convincing in a photograph. Professional authentication becomes increasingly important as the potential value rises. The same principle applies to rare errors. If a coin is claimed to be a major mint error but lacks convincing diagnostics, it should not be assigned a dramatic value simply because its appearance is unusual. In numismatics, rarity has to be demonstrated, not merely suggested. Preservation is where a collector can either protect the evidence or accidentally destroy it. If this 1997 D quarter shows unusually sharp details, strong original luster, or suspected variety, the safest approach is to avoid cleaning it altogether. Do not polish the surfaces, scrape away discoloration, rub it with cloth, or use household chemicals to make it appear brighter. The original surface is part of the coin's history, and professional graders can detect many forms of cleaning or surface alteration. Handle the piece by its edges, preferably over a soft, clean surface, and store it in an inert holder that does not expose the coin to damaging materials. If the coin appears valuable, documenting it before submission is also sensible. Photograph both sides under consistent lighting, record its weight, inspect the edge, and preserve any information about where it came from. Professional encapsulation can provide both protection and an independent assessment of authenticity and grade. For collectors studying modern quarters, this process is particularly valuable because the difference between an MS-65, MS-66, MS-67, and MS-68 coin can be difficult for an inexperienced eye to judge. Strike quality, contact marks, luster, surface cleanliness, and eye appeal all interact. A coin can technically be uncirculated but still fail to impress because of heavy bag marks or weak details. Conversely, a coin with exceptional surfaces and a strong strike can attract collectors even when the date itself is common. PCGS notes that 1997 D examples at MS-66 and MS-67 have traded in relatively modest ranges, while the highest certified levels have considerably more scarcity. Its set registry information also indicates that the condition census reaches MS-68, with very few coins occupying that top level. And that brings the investigation to the most important conclusion. The 1997 D Washington Quarter is not a rare coin simply because it has a D mint mark, but it can become a significant collectible when exceptional condition or a genuinely documented variety separates it from the hundreds of millions produced. The verified $978 MS68 auction result is the clearest demonstration of what the market has actually rewarded, while the much lower documented prices for MS66 and MS67 pieces show why grade alone is not enough to predict value. The current PCGS price information likewise places ordinary certified examples far below the spectacular prices sometimes claimed online, while its records show that the highest certified levels command the greatest attention. So if you are examining a circulated 1997 D quarter, begin with realistic expectations. Check the date, confirm the D mint mark, examine Washington's portrait, study the lettering, inspect the eagle, look for unusual doubling or genuine production abnormalities, and evaluate the surfaces for wear, damage, cleaning, and original luster. If the coin is clearly circulated and ordinary, its collector significance is primarily historical rather than monetary. If, however, something about the coin genuinely stands out, resist the temptation to clean it or immediately assign an enormous value. Compare it with authenticated examples, seek expert attribution, and let professional grading establish the evidence. The most important lesson from this quarter is that collector value is created by scarcity combined with quality and demand. A common coin can become difficult when you demand perfection, and a seemingly ordinary piece can become fascinating when careful examination reveals a documented characteristic. That is why the 1997 D Washington Quarter continues to deserve a second look, not because every example is a hidden fortune, but because the difference between ordinary and exceptional can sometimes be found in details small enough to escape an untrained eye.